Thanks, friend.
Good luck. Have fun.
It's gonna be great. I'm sorry, friend, but here, I'll put it more like that.
Oh, I like the way you have it.
Oh, yeah.
I'll put it more like that.
Sorry.
All right.
Just lock the door.
I'm gonna do for people. Yeah. This is just for my own assignment, so I can just get them. I'm still gonna do a video.
No,
It's a high.
I'd be happy to help you.
Good. Just. I'm sure you can. I'm sure you're sick. Everyone's like sick. Okay.
Make it more interactive.
Oh. So I'm really, really excited about it. You go to that. So I don't think those I always see you take notes. Should I now look right now too? Remember, I write. I always write everything down, and I know.
Andy, can I get you a pencil yet?
No, thank you. Okay.
I'm not doing my mic. I think the fan will stay off right now, so we'll go ahead and start. Okay, so our PD is over a survey poll of what we needed most for our grade level. And we felt like what we were really missing was having student ownership in their writing. And it felt very formulaic. They were waiting for a lot of guidance. And so when we looked at our assessment pieces and we started looking at their written responses, we just didn't feel like they were taking a lot of ownership and putting their own voice into their writing. So that became the need of the PD. So here are the concerns. We felt like they were thoughtless. They weren't really transferring what we were talking about with writing in general. And so we felt like if I teach you this skill, you can't apply it to any other piece of writing because they were very much, I'm going to do this for this one assignment, but we weren't seeing transferred to the next prompt. So first, just reflect on what you currently do. In what ways do you feel like your writing instruction right now feels formulaic, where it's a little bit teacher-led or things like that. I don't want to prompt you too much because I'd rather hear what you're thinking right now.
I know in sixth grade we relied a lot on the race strategy, which is great, but then they see a question and they just say, "Is this a race ace? What is this?" And I'm like, "Because we've not taught you how to figure this out. We just tell you it's a race or whatever it is." So while it's really helpful for I feel like the scaffold room are struggling writers, for my top tier writers, they like use it as a crutch now and they feel away from them. But then, how can you answer this question effectively?
No, I totally agree. I feel like race is a good scaffold, and it helps build the writing up. Like we have some meat to the writing, but they don't necessarily know that you're allowed to play with that strategy. Like if I want to convey my meaning a little bit more, I might cite additional evidence, and then I might explain that more, and then I might play with evidence some more. And so they don't know that you can do CE, and then maybe go back and answer in another problem. So I agree with that completely. Anybody else feel like there's something that came to mind with formulaic right now?
Whenever we were writing, very often we'll do like one paragraph a day for this research or this narrative. And it always ends up where their body paragraph, every student's look very similar. And it's not that I told them what to write or that I gave them like specific, like, it says this, but they're essentially just filling out a planner that then they put together, and it's all the same structure, it's all the same content, and they don't have a lot of room, or they don't feel comfortable with playing with the information that they have.
No, I think that is definitely when I think about getting them those thinking starters, I feel like that becomes you have to write it this way. Even down to like topic sentences, everyone sounds the same because there's been almost a formula to get them there. So, before we move any further, it's very important that we address explicit instruction, how does all the research, the peer reviewed journals, everything comes back to explicit instruction is best. So, we don't want to remove that from the writing instruction. We want it to be modeled. This is that next thing. What happens when explicit instruction is the only instruction, and I think that's where we are now. I think we've been so explicit that they wait for it and they don't know how to make writing decisions. So this was our fourth grade assessment piece where we realized, oh my goodness, we've gotten them into a huge problem. We've been writing, and all of our topic sentences have been done the same. And so an assessment prompt that had nothing to do with physical features of behaviors from a previous writing prompt, they applied that topic sequence onto an assessment piece, and the connection was we clearly didn't even think about what the topic was. You're just trying to shoot out what the teacher has prompted you to do. I think you do a second to read this. It's either on your handout or you can read it up here. What stood out to you from this?
Student choice.
I think like for me, it's, we've done writing in times where kids do get to choose what they want to write about. And they're so excited. But then like in class, it's so guided because we all have the same prompt, we're all using the same graphic organizer, we're looking at the mentor text that's almost identical to what we want them to produce. So they don't really get any kind of choice. But when we do give them the opportunity to choose, like I've done some research report groups and stuff like that, and they are excited because they get to pick what they want to research about and what they want to write about.
So alignment has been the person holding the pen is what you were learning when we have too much of thinking for the students to be deprived of the learning. That was kind of like in your face, we have to change. So this kind of leads us to where we want. We know that we need explicit instruction, but how can we get them here? So here are the goals. We want to look for explicit instruction, but also a little bit of strategic so that we can get self-driven students. That will elevate the agency, the performance. There are lots of factors that can help build student agency, so we're going to talk about that. There's a few instructional strategies that you can have in place to help students become more self-directed so that you're not the one doing all of the critical thinking. And within that, it can look a little bit like a workshop model. So we will go ahead and start with that first one. Chris Giovanni is an author who really focuses on how do we get students engaged. And that can look like reading, writing, and And there are three different components of that engagement, and it can be behavioral, emotional, or cognitive. And so when we think about all three pieces having to be there, we're wanting students to have more ownership. We want them to make more thoughtful decisions. So how do we build those three components in our classrooms to help them feel like what they do actually matters? Because that's what it comes down to, is they have to buy in that whatever I'm putting forth, someone cares about. And it's either them caring about it themselves or knowing that others in the room care about it and they want to do well for them. So when we think about behavioral, it's more so let's establish the routine of being self-driven. And so it's a culture in the room where we're all talking about these strategies and we're all thinking about when it would be useful. The cognitive is making them feel like they have the choice and then feeling that sense of ownership so they're cognitively engaged. And then the emotional comes from when you build that culture. You have them connecting with each other because they're giving each other feedback. It might be positive, but it can also be suggesting something, making them feel like they're cared about and their writing is cared about. All of that will build a sense of agency and ownership in writing. The emotional part, I feel like, is the strongest component that we have to build on because they have to feel like what they're doing matters. And so all the research that I was reading, every single one had a common theme, and it was feedback. Feedback was number one with how to improve writing. This is giving them an authentic audience. They always know that someone is going to be reading it and responding to it, if it's peers or yourself. It has to be frequent. It has to be something where they know at the end of the day, someone's going to check in with you. And it may not be you every day. It could just be that at the end of your writing block, you're sending them off to their writing partner so they can get some sort of a check-in for accountability. And they know that what they worked on that day, someone wants to read. Peer feedback is often the strongest. Everything that I was reading was students are going to be challenging one another, and that's where that self-directed part will fit in because they'll be asking, why did you do that? Why did you make that choice? And they'll defend it, or they'll be given a little bit more thought and they'll slow down and maybe revise that. The cognitive side of this, they have to be engaged and challenged. And when we provide mini lessons that are directly linked to what they need, they're going to be a lot more excited because they are going to realize, like, this mini lesson is for me. When I conferenced with Mrs. Groves, I heard her say, we need to work on this, and now there's a mini lesson. Because a lot of times what you'll see is when you're giving feedback, you're going to start seeing some common trends, and then you'll just build some of those mini lessons around what your classroom needs versus the curriculum. So they will feel like they're being heard, they're being listened to, they're being tailored to, and that will build the agency for them. I think this is something that when you have a curriculum, you might tend to stray away from because you just keep moving forward. And curriculum is so important, but we also have to find another way to build in a responsive reaction to what we're seeing. And we need both, which goes back to that goal of how can we have explicit with that self-directed side of it. So we know explicit instruction is not going to be the time where they can think critically about their writing. So we need something more. So the additional time where they can play around with these strategies is where that's going to be. This is the big part. It needs to be self-directed. Like we said in the very beginning, how our writing feels formulaic. We are the ones who are saying we're going to write this next body paragraph, and somehow they all look the same. And it's not that we're prompting them with sentence starters, but if we're using a strategy like race, or if we're using those formulaic topic sentences, it will. And we want them to be able to gauge the quality of their own writing. But if it's only teacher-led, they're always going to think, well, I must be doing good. I'm doing what the teacher asked. So we need to have them have a chance where it's not us leading every word that comes out of their mouth. What are some current things that you're doing right now? Because you probably are. Something that's building up a self-directed writer. It can be the littlest thing that you feel like, you know what, if I just build this up, I think that could be a piece of one of those three for building up engagement.
When I check in with my kids, they, at the end of almost every writing block, they all want to personally read me what they wrote. Like, they're very excited about it. So I try to get through as many of them as I can. Like, as they finish, come to me. Let me see what you have. As you finish, come to me. But I need to utilize more the peer self accountability because they are excited want to do that more. So
And you're only
That's
one
something-
person.
yeah, and I'm only one person,
That's
so
a lot.
it's very overwhelming. And sometimes I'll say, we have to go to PE friends, but like leave your papers on my
Yeah.
desk, and I promise you, I'm gonna read them and put little notes on them. I'm gonna read it. They want it to be seen.
Yes.
So that's something I want to like amp up more.
Yes. That will also help the classroom management of the workshop block because you'll feel less bombarded with a line of students waiting for you. You can truly engage with one at a time, and they're engaged because they're actively getting feedback. They're not just waiting for you.
Yeah.
Anybody else have something they feel like is present?
I started peer editing this year for the first time, and that was, some of my struggling writers, like, even still this week, which was surprising to me, was like, can I unsubmit that? Because we're in Google Classroom, and can I have Braden look at that again? And I'm like, sure you can. Like, that's something that one of my students, really fell in love with that process, having someone see his writing that was not me, because, I'm kind of judging it, or I do have to give an assessment grade on it, right? But his friend does not. So that he felt safe with his friend, which is something I hadn't really seen before. So it's something I really want to carry into next year and do more with.
I need to beef that up too because I do it, but I feel like sometimes the feedback they give each other is not always the best, or they like miss so much.
Yeah.
And so almost like we either teach them how do you give peer feedback, and then what they can take that skills throughout the year.
I think that's huge. Just with like explicit instruction and what they write, how they communicate is definitely a key part. So one of the opportunities that we can get them to think critically about what they're writing is a strategy called EASE. This is a research-based strategy. I'm going to give you the article just so that in your free time you can read a little bit more about it, but we're going to circle in on a specific section. Right there on the very first page, go ahead and read where it says, where's Papa going? This is just a quick excerpt from Charlotte's Web. And then read that first column underneath where it talks about specific language and ways that we could really analyze that author's craft. Okay, I'm going to pause you there. Just from those first two paragraphs, what stood out to you most about looking at that opening line from Charlotte's Web?
Just the many, variety of ways the author hooks us and thinking, then I'm thinking about, okay, how have I taught my students to use a hook? And I'm like, that's not how I've taught them about that. And so I'm like what? Okay, so then now I'm like, okay, well, how did this author do that? How can I teach the kids that? That's my next question, I guess. My program framework.
Doesn't that feel more authentic than the catchy hooks where you're like, have you ever gone on vacation?
Did you know that?
Right?
Yeah.
And I feel like we all have done that. And so having a really authentic piece of writing to then say, how could this look in your writing? They would become a lot more engaged in that way. We're going to jump to pages 192, where the strategy is introduced. So the strategy takes 4 steps. The acronym is EASE, stands for examine, assess, suggest, and envision. So basically, we've got them exploring the author's choices, like you can easily see right there with that opening line. They're asking themselves, why did the author write this way? To grab your attention, to get the hook. What are some suggestions that the author could have written it in other ways? So we're allowed to critique the author of a published text just like we are our own. And once we get into this analytical view, we can start reading like writers. We can ask ourselves, was this the best author's move or approach to grab the reader's attention, or should we have changed it a little bit? And then finally, envision it. How could this look in my own piece of writing? So we're trying to train them up just like we would for that peer feedback. They don't know how to do this yet. So this is just a training them up into looking at text like a writer would. So it would eventually become a part of the culture. So on page 192, it starts to introduce the examine part. And then if you keep going, you can kind of skim through each one. So you'll see assess comes next, then suggest, and you'll turn it one more side and you'll see envision. Go ahead and read through each one of those sections so you actually see how they would break down the strategy. And while you're reading, annotate how this looks differently than your own instruction for writing. it's okay if you haven't gotten through all four parts, but just so you have an idea of how this could bring about some self-directed thinking. Let's start with, how do you feel like this attempt could bring about more authentic writing?
I think like the biggest note I made is that they're gonna be reading more authentic writing. That makes sense. Like when I think about the mentor text I am provided to the curriculum, that is written for a specific. That is not something that is published outside of that curriculum, right? Whereas Charlotte's Web is a well-known book. It's written out. It's outside of anything else we've written, and so it would be. I don't know. Does it? It kind of almost gives it some more credibility to the kids, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it offers more creativity because whereas I feel like if they see at the bottom that it says our curriculum name or whatever, they're gonna be like, oh well, that's what I have to write this. Like there's no other option because it's not fitting the big box.
And very often are not very engaging texts or very interesting texts whenever we're using those ones. So it's like they're modeling texts that are not, our end goal anyways. They're not like incredibly crafted, amazing works that they're trying to model. It's like I always feel sometimes that I'm trying to choose a mentor text, and I'm like, okay, they could do this,
Yeah.
and that's very different from using an actual text that is, something that is well known and everyone knows of because of its interest and engagement.
I think it helps that kids already know them, like they've seen the movie or they've heard of it at least when you bring it up.
So a few things that really stood out to me that I feel like would address our big goals of our area meeting. Talks a lot about how when we are looking at these techniques, they're not in isolation. And when we're doing explicit instruction, it would be in isolation. So this is a good bridge to see, basically modeling for them how it all fits together so they can see the big picture when we're so often showing them piece by piece. We're also connecting them to the writing moves so it becomes more personal to them because they have an opinion about it. And then they're more likely to try it out in their own writing that way. Asking them to kind of think about the why behind it is going to build up that critical thinking. And so they will eventually start thinking about that in their own writing. They'll ask, why am I choosing to write this? Is it actually helping my audience? Is it conveying my message more clearly? But most importantly, I think they're learning that they can manipulate sentences, that they can play with it and they can see what version of their own writing they like best. And if you can do that with a published author with a mentor text, you can definitely do that with your own. You saw on page 193, they give you a list of picture books to kind of play with the e-strategy with. Another really good resource if you are unsure of how to start is this book called The Writing Thief. This is Ruth Cullum, that excerpt, the quote that I had up there right away in the beginning of the presentation. This is her. So Ruth Cullum also wrote, Write It Well. That's the author or the title. And this comes from that mentor. So they give you lots of mentor text and then they tell you what you would really look at with. So this is a little bit more guidance for you as a teacher, just getting into really analyzing a trait and picking the right text to enhance that if you wanted something. They also talked about how we want to give them a chance to either revise or add on to writing to apply it into their own, and that's the envision part. We want them to transfer it in. Something that I started doing is having these things called writing wallets, and basically what it is they just have pieces of writing that we've done throughout the whole year. And when I say, I want you to go through your writing wallet because we're going to try this strategy on a piece that's in here. Because the piece they could currently be working on may not be a good fit for that strategy. And so we want them thinking critically of, just because I'm on this writing doesn't mean I apply it to this writing. Which one would be the best fit? So they would go through their writing wall and they would really think, well, I remember this story, that would be a perfect spot to revise in that. So when we want them applying the mentor strategy, we want to give them plenty of options to actually think about what would be best to apply it to. We could really get into a dangerous teacher-directed, again, just because we're looking at this mentor text, if I'm still telling you to write it in the piece you're on, no matter what that piece is, there's still no critical thinking. So this gives them the sense of choice, the sense of, is this a good fit? Is the storyline going to match up with that? So everything keeps centering around putting the ownership in their lap and it being more student selected, basically. The next slide is another just synthesized idea that no matter what approach you use, if it's ease or if it's something else, the goal is that you get them making decisions. You want them thinking about their writing and just passing that ownership. So you'll present things to them and you'll give them authentic model pieces so they can decide, when should I use this? But at the end of the day, we just want them making choices. That could look like so many other strategies. So ease is a research-based approach, but that does not mean it's the only way to build critical thinkers in writing. You could do things like picture book studies, where you just have a basket, and all of the books in that basket are looking at the author's craft of using dialogue. And so they simply read like writers, and they're analyzing what all these authors are doing so well, so that they later can think about how to apply it in their writing. That could look like what are some good leads, what's really good setting, character description. It could be any writing that you really want to build up in them. Give them examples and let them kind of analyze and collect and then talk about it. That is the number one. Go back to feedback constantly. It's about building that culture of communicating, talking, making sure that it's them coming up with these ideas so that we keep them engaged. It could be trait-based writing, where yes, you follow the curriculum. That is number one. It's explicit. But just like this article said, we want to show them how it all ties together. And so we could start a little bit more of, we finish that curriculum piece, now let's go into a trait-based study. And when you start using that language in your classroom, you could start looking at mentor texts and analyzing how is the voice in this writing, or let's look at the word choice, and just making sure that traits in general are being discussed. It could be studying an author. It could be, you know that you teach narrative, informative, all through the year. You could be collecting certain writing techniques or strategies that you really want them to keep coming back to. So when they write their future piece, they have something to look to. So you could just collect things as you go. You would want it to be a classroom built. But when you have a mini lesson on focusing in on a small moment of your story, add that up. And that way, as they write their next narrative, they remember, I don't want to let go of that when I go into thinking about the strong beginning moment. So it's all about building upon what you've done in the past, helping them see how it connects together, and just making it a constant conversation so you're not letting it go. So the big question would be, how do we do both? We only have so much time today, how do we do it all? And it's got to be with just some balance. We cannot let go of our explicit curriculum standards-based instruction. But we could be more mindful in how much time we're allotting for the lesson to be. We could also have smaller chunks of instruction to allow for more time of free writing on a given part. When we think about our classroom time frame, we want to be mindful of I've got this much time to get through your benchmark writing piece, and then when you're finished, I want you to go into your choice writing. And that choice writing is almost like a playtime. It's a prompt that maybe they came up on their own or you sat down and helped them come up with. But in the end, it's helping them pull all the writing strategies into one single piece. And when you're conferencing with them, it could very well be on that choice writing. Because you know the benchmark piece is very teacher-led. And if we're all going to look the same, then that's not going to be the piece I want to reflect on. I would much rather reflect on a piece that I had no part in and see what holes there still are. Because that will lead to more mini lessons and future instruction for benchmark. If you're not able to apply it to a whole different piece, you haven't learned it yet. So it not only will give them more authentic writing time, them more ownership, but you a better view of them as a writer. So thinking about this idea of building in explicit instruction with a little bit of a workshop model, how could that work in your classroom? Or what would you have to change within your time frame to make it work? Do you feel like it's doable?
I think it's definitely doable.
Do you feel like there are days that you cut writing short because you like done all you could do with the benchmark piece and you could extend it with something else?
Because I feel like with the benchmark piece, they're not interested in it, and so they like just zone out after 15 minutes of it. So you're like, I'm not just gonna keep going, so you just move on.
Yeah.
Or if it's like you can stop 15 minutes on this and go to a different writing, then you're still doing one writing block.
I think we've kind of had this conversation, so the challenge, because I'm departmentalized and time is my challenge. But if I'm really thinking about too, because I have sixth grade and leaving me next year, and I do know from just conversations with seventh grade, when we had the vertical meetings last year, they spend most of their time, they don't have the curriculum meetings, so they spend a lot of their time writing literary analysis and those kinds of things. So I think this, the benefit of it would be there for us. There may be some other things that I could cut down on, like not to say like I want to cut down any small group time, but limiting some of that because at sixth grade, I'm here in junior high and they're not looking at small group time in junior high either. So just having more of that one-on-one conferencing instead of formal small group time, that would be kind of where I could shave some time here and there. Because I think it's a priority that I know that we need to work on in sixth grade.
So going forward, out of everything you've heard, we talked about wanting to build up student agency and ownership, making sure they feel engaged in all three areas. We talked about some strategies to get them critically thinking about their writing and how that could look instructionally in your day. What additional supports or development areas, information do you feel like you still need to successfully and confidently go towards a little bit of that workshop component? Because you know that you feel good about explicit, that's our curriculum driven. This is the part that we are really lacking, just that application time, and maybe even it's the feedback part. Out of what we discussed, do you have specific kind of roadblocks that you feel like I just need to know more about this to feel more confident or to be able to put it into practice?
I'm a visual learner, so I need to see it happening. Mm-hmm. So like classroom observations,
yeah.
Which I know that's not always possible, but I'm hoping it's more possible now than it has been.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's for me. I need to see it happening.
Mm-hmm.
What that looks like, and then think about, okay, it's probably outside my grade level. How can I make those changes to enhance my sixth graders' writing?
I'd like to see like peer feedback in a classroom where it is actually successful and it works. Because I feel like I tried it in my classroom, but it doesn't always feel successful. It just kind of feels like and they actually helping each other. So I like to see like somebody who like has maybe guidelines or just a way in place for them to do it where they're getting something out of it. And then also like teacher feedback, like how much do you give? Sometimes I feel like I give too much or like I don't tear them down, but like I just give so much feedback it's almost overwhelming.
Yeah.
But then I don't want to barely give any and then that's not good them either. So kind of that medium.
Well, just to help you ease your mind on that, research says that you are best by picking one thing, and that's it. If you pick one critique on writing, it gives them an area of focus without overwhelming them. I think that is something that will help relieve you when you do have your conferences, because you'll feel like I at least gave you some feedback. It was a positive and a way to help you grow. And then I can send you on your way feeling like you have direction, and then I can have the next person over. So we've got just observing it in general. How do we build up and support that peer feedback, and what would that look like? And then making sure that we just do our teacher to student feedback in a supportive and not too critical way. Is there anything else anybody feels like?
I also think just having conversations with someone who's doing it too. Like seeing it's doing one thing, but then being able to follow. Okay, explain like what procedurally did you do to get them here? Like, because I mean, if I were to see it in action, I'm not going to see it in the first 2 months of school. It would be later on, and I'm going to be trying to build things myself. So, and then
I can launch that environment.
and then any sort of resource that was someone like, if this is what you're doing business growth, then what resources did you read that I could be working through the summer to be prepared? Even if I'm not able to observe, I won't be able to observe at this point before it happens. Like, what can I already be doing, and then have an idea where I'm at, and then be able to make adjustments after I observe.
Okay. Well, this is something that I feel really passionate about. It's not at all something that I feel like I've gotten completely worked out. I feel like there's a lot of components that you try, and then you feel like I'm doing really well in this area, but now I'm kind of lacking over here, and then you go build that up, and then something else kind of drops. So when you dabble in this, don't feel like you don't do it all well, you're failing. Because if you try one little piece of this, you're going to be building up some area of your student engagement, their ownership of their writing. Just take it one step at a time. It can feel like a lot being thrown at you because you're talking about the engagement, you're talking about giving them the opportunities, changing up instructional strategies. So maybe just pick one little area. Try that first. I've got several sources that could help in a few areas. So if later on you start thinking, I'd really like to know more about one of these topics, can you point me to something? I'm happy to give you either article or a book that I have read. And we can kind of sit down and talk about how it would look in your classroom. I'm going to give you this real quick feedback. If you don't mind, just fill out you can either take it with you or you